Hi, everyone. Welcome to Optimize Lecture Learning. My name's Melissa Ostrowski. I'm the Academic Success Program Coordinator on the Learning Development and Success team in Student Experience. Learning Development and Success has a number of services and resources that you can connect with for support. To start with services, our PAL Center, which is drop-in and virtual this year, staffed by high-achieving undergraduate students who are able to provide course-specific assistance as well as general learning skills and strategies. We have one-on-one appointments where our learning counselors and math and science specialists are able to provide individualized support around your academic wellness. The Learn to Thrive program is a 10-week program where students engage with or learn about a learning strategy and a mental health strategy each week that will support them in their ability and capacity to thrive. Our resources, the first being our presentations. You're engaging with one now. You can find other topics and other presentations on our website, as well as handouts. Again, that wide variety of topics that you can read through and browse at your leisure. Here is an overview of the presentation. We'll start off with the basics, a general overview of lectures. Then we'll move into the points behind being a strategic learner, so specifically course outline and lecture styles. We'll talk about being an active thinker, so strategies around note-taking, listening, staying attentive, and we'll wrap up talking about being on or staying on top of your learning. So the concepts of lecture review and solving problems as they arise. So take a moment to think about what your concerns are about university lectures. That could be lectures in person on campus or done online. Some of them might be the speed of the lecture. Are you able to take notes that will make sense afterwards? Can you concentrate and focus during the lecture? Will you understand the material? How is it possible to identify the important points? Can you stay awake, be alert? Concern around drowsiness. These are all common and very normal concerns around university lectures. Also, take a moment to assess your current approach to lectures by answering these questions. If you're a first-year incoming student, consider the importance of answering yes to these questions. So for those of you who are returning students, the more responses are yes to these questions, that's what we're going for here. So take a moment and answer yes or no to these 9 questions here. And like I said, if there are any that you're answering no to throughout this presentation, hopefully you'll gather strategies and tips to then shift that no into a yes with understanding and information on why that shift is important. Before we go any further, I want to touch on a few key components of online. The first one being this concept of asynchronous learning. You may have heard of it. So it's the idea where the instruction is happening at a different time or a different location than when the student is receiving that instruction. So the students are responsible for, setting up a time to review that material on their own. Here, it's really important to set up a consistent schedule. So if it's a 3-hour lecture per week, finding 3 hours, scheduling it into your weekly planner so that you can stay on top of material and engage in it on a consistent basis. The other type of learning, or synchronous learning, is when the instruction, it's broadcast at the same time that the student is receiving it. So like a live lecture. Again, ensure that you are prepared to learn, you are engaging in the lecture material, you're engaging in the chapters, you're having read them, you've gone over the PowerPoint slides, you've looked at the learning outcomes and objectives. It's a great way to increase your interest and therefore your motivation for learning. The other thing to consider with online learning specifically are ways to minimize the distractions. So as you settle in to listen to or watch the lecture material, ensuring that you have everything you need at your fingertips. Also being aware of the number of tabs you have open and eliminating those distractions. All right, so let's dive into ways that you can become a strategic learner. Remember that within each discipline, each course, with each professor, it's different and their learning expectations. A great place to start in terms of finding out what those expectations are is the course outline. Read through it to find the learning outcomes and objectives, what you are expected to know, be able to do, or to value by the end of the course. In the course outline or syllabus, you'll find the technology that's required for the course. You'll find where information will be posted and the assessment components that will make up your final grade. The other thing to know that will be different for each discipline and each professor is how the content will be delivered around the lecture style. And we'll dive into that a bit more detail. Let's start with some course outlines and ways to get clues. So the highlighted or changed font there provides us with focus to the course. So we know for this history course that we'll be discussing those 4 transformational wars as well as the topics highlighted at the bottom. Here is another example of using the course outline to provide you with clues. For this specific course, this animal physiology course, going into a lecture expecting to learn facts will be difficult. Rather, in this case, the general overview from the readings will be complemented with in-depth discussion in lecture. In order to participate in that in-depth discussion, you'll require knowledge of basic terms to follow along and participate with the in-depth explanations. Also, you can see from point 2, the modeling of critical reading. So knowing that a method was used in a primary paper is less important than understanding the pros and cons to that specific method. So you can get that information from clues in the course outline around what to expect. Then we get into different types of lecture styles. So we'll have a few examples on the following slides. Up first is argument-based. So the lectures may feel a bit like an essay where your professor will present an argument and different views. They'll provide information, perspectives, theorists, ideologies, experiments that will prove the argument as well as the views, the competing views that are shared. Here is an analysis example where your professor is modeling those analytical skills, the critical thinking skills. They're starting with the big picture and then breaking down the different topics, and then even more so the specific details. So 2 examples with analysis are breaking down the different structures in the body, the organ systems. So starting with the big picture and then getting more and more specific. And another example is identifying and relating the literary devices to the themes of the book. So starting with the theme and then how those literary devices are used could be an example. Another 2 examples of lecture styles are participatory lectures and problem-solving lectures. In participatory, it's important, again, to go into that lecture with background knowledge so that you can take part in the discussion. In your course outline, if the discussion and participation is worth marks, again, understanding that so that you can take part and acquire those necessary marks. In problem solving, being able to work through the questions together as a group can be really helpful to see how the professor starts off with the question and then gets to the solution. Another great way to understand what to expect from your lecture is to determine if the readings are required. If they are required, then making notes from the readings on the key terms. You'll be able to use those notes that you've created from your readings to compare with the slide decks or the PowerPoint presentations, the notes that are posted for that lecture. It's a great way for you to read and pay attention to the specific ideas or arguments that are presented. And in those readings, it allows you to form initial opinions and arguments. If you have any questions, if you're confused on anything, if anything's particularly difficult, so at this point in time when you're doing those readings, make note of that so that you can ask questions, or perhaps it will become clearer through the lecture material. If the readings are not required, then using the textbook or the journal article that you've been given to read through the headings and the subheadings so you have an idea of the main concepts, the main information that's going to be shared. Read through the notes that are posted online. So again, those slide decks, or if it's a PowerPoint presentation that your professor provides, reading through that is really important. As well as determining the purpose of the lecture. Is it to go more in depth? Is it to provide, general background information? In which case, how are you getting more details? So asking those questions is really key. Up next, let's talk about ways to be an active thinker. To note take or not to note take? That is the question. Before we dive into the specific benefits of taking notes, One thing to consider for an online lecture, particularly if it's asynchronous, where you can have the ability to pause the lecture, treat it like you are in person or that it's a live lecture that you're viewing. That way you're, staying in that flow. You're not pausing, which will result in more time for taking notes, but rather, treating it like you're in person. So here are some specific benefits to taking notes. You are triggering your memory. It allows you to understand what was important. The professor, emphasizes over and over. Helps you stay alert and concentrate during the lecture. It's a resource for your studying and test preparation. And those lecture notes, those are filled with information that you can't find anywhere else. It's not information from the textbook. It's not information on the slides. It's information that your professor is saying as they're giving the lecture. When considering effective notes, you can see those points there. Around the date, that's a way for you to keep track of your notes and a way to stay organized. So by writing down the title of the lecture and the date, again, another way to stay organized. But you can see with the effective notes, the very last point, they're not verbatim. And we'll see here how verbatim notes, they take up a lot of time. You're spending more time concerned about each word that the professor is saying and trying to jot it down in your notes versus actively listening and learning the material as it is shared. Oftentimes verbatim notes, it's just like a whole bunch of information. There isn't that structure, which we'll talk about next. At the bottom of the slide there, one hint is to use, like when you're looking at your notebook, the right-hand side is always the information that you're taking live as you're listening to the lecture. So whether you're in person, whether it's a live lecture or it's the information with a pre-recorded lecture, it's the information that you're jotting down as you hear it. And then on the left side in your notebook, that can be information that you go back and add. It can be examples, it can be questions that you need to ask clarification on. The structure of notes is so key. When our notes are taken in a structured and organized way, it allows our brain to take in that information in a structured and organized way. It allows our memory to, essentially like file again in a structured and organized way. And then when it comes time to recall that information or pull it from our memory for exams or tests or essay assignments, things like that, then it's being retrieved in a structured and organized way. On the right side of the slide there, that's an example of the Cornell system of note-taking. And on the left left 1/3 of your page, that's where you're leaving room for cues. So as you do textbook readings or glance and read through the lecture notes ahead of time, you can jot down the key points in that cues area so that you're primed and ready to get that information in the lecture. The other 2/3 of the page is for notes that you're taking during class. And then at the bottom, you're leaving a bit of space for the key points, the summary of the lecture that you are writing after class and during your review time. These are more examples of structured or organization for your notes, these graphic organizers. It helps you to restructure the information. When you see it in these graphic organizers, then it helps you to find connections between the topics. You can see or have to pull out the main ideas and the supporting topics when you're structuring your notes in this way. It's a visual reminder for the notes, and it's a way that you can, summarize your notes after lecture. Within that summary note, that's what you will be using for, study purposes, study guides. So this is a great way, you've taken the information, your notes during lecture. You can pull in the information that you've taken from your readings and kind of combine that information into these types of summary organizers to then start to build your information for your study guide. These notes here that you see on the screen, these could be improved. What do you notice about them? And what are some of your suggestions on ways to improve them? As we work through making those modifications, here we are finding ways to take that information from the previous slide and improve them. And then we get here, we get to the Cornell note-taking method, where you'll see the Q column, so invisible, disability, the risk factors being unmodified versus modified, and the 3 types. And then we see the notes that were taken during lecture under the heading of hearing loss, the silent epidemic. And at the bottom, there's that space for the summary. You can see how condensed and concise it is, and the ways that all of those 3 sections of the notes can work together. Listening is so important for optimizing your lecture learning, and that starts even before you're in lecture. So before the lecture, survey or read your required readings so that you can more readily recognize new ideas and vocabulary. Check your course outline to keep track of the sequence of topics. Go to class, or if you're online, show up and be prepared to sit with physical and mental energy so that you can stay alert the whole time. If you are showing up to class tired, obviously it makes it a bit difficult to concentrate and stay focused. Go to class intending to learn as much as you can. So sit where you can keep your attention on the instructor and see and hear as well as possible. If you are at home with an online course, be sure to eliminate distractions as much as you can. So not having a whole bunch of tabs open in your browser, being in a space, having conversations with family or roommates to say, I'm going to be using this shared space at this time to cover my lecture, having that conversation. Quickly look over your notes from the previous class before this one begins. So this will help you with continuity of topics. During the lecture, these listening strategies continue to be key to your success. As you listen for opening statements, pay attention to how they outline the topics, the format, the philosophy of the specific lecture, or the overall course. Watch and listen to your instructor, not the rest of the class. Pay particular attention to the major points through their voice modulations, the pauses, the body movements, and so on. These cues will help you to discriminate between main ideas and supporting information. Listen for organization in the class content. So if the lecture is not necessarily well structured, try to organize your notes under headings and subheadings that you identify for yourself. Try to connect the new information you're hearing with what you already know. And if you don't understand, be sure to ask. After class, during office hours with your professor or the TA, another option is to check in with the learning peers at the PAL Center for more information on that course as well. Sure, I think we'd all agree that listening during lecture is key to your ability to optimize lecture learning. But in all honesty, it's so hard sometimes to pay attention and remain attentive. And here's a graph, just outlining how difficult it can be and how our mind wanders. There's definitely ways that we can ensure or stay primed to listen. And so some of those ways, sitting in an area with few or limited distractions, like I mentioned before, if you're at home for online lectures, then having a conversation with people who share your space, if you have a private study room at home, amazing. But if you're in an open space and, need to have conversations with people so that they're not distracting as you learn, be sure to have that conversation. Take notes, whether the course is in person, whether it's a live lecture online, or whether it's pre-recorded. Taking notes is key. And the way that you can prepare yourself to listen through, making eye contact, head nods, that works well in person. While you are learning online, it's similar in that you need to prime yourself to be able to listen. Go in with intention as you hit play or log into that live lecture. If you've read over your lecture notes or your course outline, again, those are ways that you can pique your interest and become motivated in the topic, which then allows you to listen attentively. We chat about these ways to monitor your comprehension in a number of our presentations. And that's because it's so key, both in your understanding of information, but also as you prepare to study and prepare to write tests and that sort of thing. So as you are learning the information and attending lecture, asking yourself questions, right? Reflecting on the information and what you understood. When you're doing that, you're highlighting the things that you need to check in with your professor or TA about around the questions. You can make note if there's something that you need to see clarity on, if you're having difficulty understanding. This is a place as you are learning and going through the material to make note of that. And again, all of those things, you are able to go to your professor, to your TA. You're able to chat with a learning peer in the PAL Center about, things that a particular concept that was difficult, or a way to clarify and make sure that you're understanding the information correctly. And the last thing, staying on top of your learning. Again, in a number of our presentations, we talk about this 24-hour to 48-hour review time. And that's a chance, once you have let some time go past after the lecture, to go back and organize those notes, create your summary notes that will begin or be the foundation for your study guide. If there are the points that you need clarified, if there's questions that you have, then this is a great time to do that. It's also a time for you to do, some practice questions or practice testing if you are given questions in the lecture to work through. As we discussed on the 2 slides ago about reflecting on your comprehension, that's also a great way to self-test and check in with yourself. Did I take in that information? Do I have any questions? What was particularly difficult or interesting or easy for me to learn? That's self-testing, which is a key piece to your success in your courses. The 24 to 48-hour review is also a way for you to then, get prepared for your next class. Another way to stay on top of your learning is to work through and problem solve any issues as they come up. So here we have a question, a concern of the professor speaking quickly and, not being able to keep up. Here are a few suggestions on what you can do if you're faced with a similar situation. That preparation before lecture is key. So having done the textbook chapters, if they're required, jotting down notes, having the cues written down if you're using the Cornell note-taking method. You can always visit your professor's office hours or TAs for additional clarification in the PAL Center. We'll show in the next slide some shorthand so that you can, make your note-taking a bit quicker. One way is to work with a peer that's in your class. So oftentimes, we can see gaps in students' notes, which makes sense if they're, you're moving at a pretty quick pace through the lecture material. Then by having someone else in the class, the two of you can work together so that, maybe all of my notes, once we see the gap, and then my partner's notes, they got that information that I missed, and we can work together to fill in those gaps. It's also a great way to pair up, build connection, have a chance to socialize. This can be done on Zoom or on FaceTime, different ways that you can check in with a peer to talk about the information, compare notes, correct anything, again, fill in those gaps. So here are a number of different symbols and abbreviations that you can use if you're finding, trying to keep up with the pace of the lecture to be difficult. Here's a few suggestions. As long as it's consistent through your notes and you understand the meaning of the symbols or abbreviations, that's the part that's key. So whether you print off something like this so that you know what everything stands for, or again, as long as you're consistent and then that's the piece that matters. So here's another way or solution that we can find to a problem. So my professor doesn't teach to my style. So one possible solution is to, appreciate the variety of lecture styles. We covered a few at the beginning through the argument style or analysis style, problem solving. So different ways lecture material can be presented, and just understanding and appreciating those differences. Also recognizing that your learning style, the way that you prefer to learn, is just that. It's a preference. It's not an ability. We can work through things and improve on them. You're always able to go to the professor and have a discussion about the topic. You know, what's the purpose of the lecture? What's the objective? What should I be getting out of it and taking away from it? That's a great conversation to have with your professor. And you can discuss learning strategies either with your professor, with other students, the learning peers from PAL who have perhaps taken that course, or checking in with a learning counselor as well to get more information and to practice those different learning strategies. So our takeaway messages: being a strategic learner, being an active learner, and staying on top of your learning is key. Thank you for tuning into our presentation on optimizing your lecture learning. Here's a few ways that you can connect with us on our website, via email. If you're looking to book an appointment, you can give us a call and we can set something up. We hope that you have a great day and enjoy